So the question of the week is, what is one habit you built so far that you're proud of? Maybe it's more steps, maybe it's drinking more water, moving more. It would be good to hear as well down in the comment. Even if obviously if you are working, if you want to put your Instagram in the comment section as well, I'm sure we can all connect. We always say that KMAC is a big, big family. So instead of just connecting with your coach, it would be good to connect with other people as well that's also on the KMAC team. So I'm sure the coaches are going to put their Instagrams as well because
I have to remember it every week.
we all need more followers. So it'd be perfect.
All right.
Right, I was going to say, should we dive into it?
We'll dive into today's topic. Okay. As usual, guys, if you want to show us a little bit of support, we'd always greatly appreciate if you could share this onto your Instagram, tag KMAC, tag your coach, and tag either myself, Sam, or David. That would be absolutely fantastic. But Sam, I'm going to come to you first. What is something about training that you used to believe that you no longer believe?
Yeah, so I'll actually carry on a theme of the Stairmaster with Arpit bringing that one up. And that's going to be cardio killing gains. To be honest, I think I probably used to believe this to give myself a little bit of an excuse not to do cardio, to be 100% honest. I've actually recently got into running a little bit more and things like that, and I've been enjoying it quite a lot. So I think if I'm not saying it was just an excuse not to do cardio, part of the reason I probably believed this was I think a lot of the early kind of research on this was kind of down the lines of, well, cardio is catabolic, it leads to muscle breakdown. Training is anabolic and leads to muscle building. They're kind of counterintuitive. So therefore, surely there's some degree of kind of interference, right? But I would say I've actually reevaluated that quite significantly through kind of own experience, to be honest, leading me to kind of look into it a little bit more. But then also just kind of reading up on it a little as well. And ultimately, I think now, if anything, there's probably a positive impact from cardio, providing it's programmed kind of sufficiently well. There's probably a positive impact on actually doing a little bit of cardio to seeing them muscle growth within your training as well.
Yeah, I think it's particularly beneficial if you're in like a muscle building phase.
Yeah.
Like if you're like pushing your body weight up to try and build muscle, one of the limiting factors that can pop up there is you're just exhausted doing your sets, like doing your 12 and 15 rep sets. Like the cardiovascular side of things can be like the limiting factor there. Like honestly, like this idea of like cardio killing gains, I think this is probably a staple that we all used to believe, to be honest. But we're seeing it more and more frequently now. This kind of concurrent training, where you're doing a combination of resistance training but also cardiovascular training, that up to a certain point, they're going to, what is the word when things help each other? Jesus.
Yeah, I know. I know what you're trying. I can't think of the word either. I think a lot of the more recent research into it may have even been sparked from kind of like the emergence of like Hyrox and things like that. Shout out Tanya, by the way. Smashed it. Hyrox it was in Spain, right?
I almost forgot about it. Yeah, Spain.
Yeah. Yeah. Complement, symbiotic, both work nicely. Thanks for letting us know. I literally had a mind blank like Dee as well, but yeah, I think to be honest, to some degree, as Dee said, your ability to push a set is somewhat dictated by your perception of effort in that set. And I think if we have good cardiorespiratory fitness, our perception of effort is likely to sit a little bit lower. And therefore, our ability to actually push the intensity of that set is likely a little bit higher as well.
Yeah. And I think even from like a cardiovascular health perspective, a lot of the resistance training that we do, particularly when you learn to train really, really hard, that would actually fall into the category of like high intensity interval training. Like, because you will, like, if you're training really hard, you'll get your heart rate up towards 170, 190 in a set of like leg press or hack squat. But if you are to be able to add in some like low intensity cardio, that is less like, right, less taxing as a whole as well. You can add in some low intensity steady state, and you're doing that like twice a week. I think the big thing there is how you organize it. So one of the things that is a good like, kind of general heuristic to follow, that if you're going to be doing like your cardio and your resistance training in the same day, do your resistance training first and then follow it on by your cardio. If you do your cardio first, and essentially what happens is you will be fatigued going into your resistance training. Now, if I know a lot of people won't be doing this, but if you could like split them up, it's a fine idea to be doing like a little bit of cardio in the morning, then you're training a couple of hours later as well.
Yeah, I think on that as well, if you are doing cardio in the same day, especially if you do your cardio first, the type of cardio probably has a little bit more of an impact as well. If you're doing something that's a little bit lower impact and kind of concentric only, like cycling, for example, versus running, you're probably going to be more okay going ahead and training afterwards, as opposed to if you did a run and then you train afterwards. I'd also say if your priority is cardiovascular fitness, actually doing it first probably makes a little bit more sense. But yeah, just ultimately having a plan around that is going to be key. You brought up intensity of cardio as well. And that makes me then think of another myth that I was actually going to bring up, which is lower intensity cardio helps to burn more body fat, right? I'm sure there's a few of us who could probably jump in on this one. But essentially, the reason for that is there is a correlation between the fuel that we use for our activity and where our heart rate currently sits, right? So if we have a lower heart rate, we're more towards that zone 2 area, which is typically what I would recommend we do for concurrent training. Just from a standpoint of it's easier to then manage everything all together. There's less likely to be any sort of interference. But the idea that training in that zone actually burns body fat faster isn't necessarily correct, right? Yes, you're more likely, or yes, you will predominantly use more fats as a fuel as opposed to carbohydrates. But ultimately, when it comes down to actually losing body fat, the net caloric deficit will remain exactly the same, because your body will then adapt later in the day the fuel that it actually uses to then go ahead and kind of balance things out a little bit more there.
Yeah, it's essentially just like that fat oxidation doesn't equal fat loss. Just because you will be like mobilizing and like using fat as more of a predominant fuel, it doesn't necessarily equate to more like greater fat loss. We see the same with like fasted cardio as well. Falls into the same boat there. Yes, you're going to see more oxidation of fatty acids and usage as fuel. But generally what we actually do see then throughout the duration of the rest of the day is actually a shift towards using a little bit more carbohydrates. So in the end, it doesn't actually matter.
Exactly that. Hit the nail on the head. So I think on the topic of cardio, something that people often believe there as well is, okay, if I'm doing lower intensity cardio, I'm not going to sweat as much, right? Is there going to be any sort of correlation between how much you're sweating and then also just the degree of kind of fat loss that we see? Vicky, do you want to go ahead and jump in?
Yeah, sweat is probably one of those things where people think, if I'm not sweating, I actually haven't worked hard enough, or, I need to be sweating to have an effective workout, which honestly is actually far from the truth. Me personally, I actually don't sweat that much, even if I'm running or I've been on the Stairmaster for 30, 40 minutes. I don't know why. I guess I can call it a blessing in disguise sometimes. But when I was younger and at the start of my fitness journey, I used to think, oh my God, like why is this not working? I'm literally like working so hard and there's nothing coming off me. So surely something's wrong. But really and truly, it's very dependent on each individual. It literally matters on conditions as well, right? Where you are, outdoors, indoors, AC, no AC, fans, lots of ventilation, your age, your height as well, your genetics. So initially the sweat does occur to regulate your body's core temperature, and just initially every individual suffers with it differently, right? So yeah, sweat is definitely, if you're not sweating, it doesn't technically mean that your workout is bad.
Yeah, Dee just mentioned he's sat here sweating. I was actually going to say the exact same thing. I think my heating kicked in like 20 minutes ago and it's blown up.
Yeah, but it's fascinating, the inter-individual variation in sweat loss during like an hour of aerobic exercise. Like we actually, like back in my like strength and conditioning days, we would have done like like sweat tests where I'll lose like 1.2 liters of liquid over an hour duration of like a middle intensity exercise, as opposed to be some other individuals who will only lose like 300 mil.
Very individual, isn't it?
Yeah, I think Felicia, I'm going to come to you because I know you've been previously guilty of like killing yourself training wise, like showing up training 7 days a week. I'd love to know, give us some thoughts on that.
I guess when I first started my fitness journey, I just thought the more you work out, the better. Like every single day you should be working out. And then you get into this pattern where you think like rest days are not needed and you feel lazy on less rest days, but actually they're so effective. And I think when I cut down my training days from like 7 to like 4, I found more results coming through and I was able to maintain that as well. And just like the mental aspect of it, like not feeling like guilty or anything like that became a bit easier. But definitely a myth that is not true is quality is better than quantity and we don't have to train every single day to get the best results.
Just a quick little question that came into the chat. Do zone 2 and zone 3 lead to the same caloric burn? No. So generally speaking, that like the higher intensity will lead to more calories burnt. Yeah. So the only reason you do it, like the zone 3 can then just be a little bit more fatiguing though. If it's at a slightly higher intensity, it can be a little bit more fatiguing. So it's hard to do on a more regular basis. That would be the only kind of point there. But yes, you will burn more calories given the time period that you do.
And in terms of what it actually burns, it's a different type of fuel. So carbohydrates versus fat in zone 2 versus zone 3. So do you burn more carbohydrates in zone 3 and more fat in zone 2?
As a general heuristic, yeah. It is dependent on like the fueling that you have available as well. So if you have that kind of glucose available and that you're training at that higher intensity, then yes, you will tend to favor towards like glycogen usage or glucose usage.
And our goal is to actually use more, sort of burn more fat than the glycogen stores, because you want to use the glycogen stores for strength training.
Yeah, so like that is essentially it. Yeah. But like essentially we're having a conversation about like the minutia here, where it's not necessarily going to equate to any like better fat loss or better muscle gain or performance in the gym. It can be a good idea to like make sure that you have glycogen or glucose availability for your resistance training. Yes, but like if you were to organize your training in such a way where you did your resistance training first and then your cardio second, or you did your cardio on a rest day from training, then the amount of glucose there not going to matter too much.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then a lot of the training protocols, so we are encouraged to do a certain number of steps, but but I don't think, at least in my journey, there hasn't been a specification around which zone those steps should be. And the steps, unless you're doing on in a good amount of incline, tend to be more in zone 1.
Yeah.
And is that just as effective? Or is it the idea there is just create movement and not necessarily like burn calories?
So go for it.
Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off, but yeah. Essentially, the steps are not intended as cardiovascular work per se. So in terms of our energy expenditure, we've also got something called non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is essentially kind of any movement throughout the day that's not considered to be structured exercise. Steps are probably our best manner of essentially tracking where that currently is and ensuring that as we actually lose body fat, our activity outside of exercise doesn't drop, because that can be something that ends up getting down regulated as we actually lose body fat. So our steps are essentially tracking just general movement and encouraging that through the day, as you say.
Okay. And then you encourage getting these steps, not sort of, like 5,000 in the morning and 5,000 at night, but more towards, is it more effective to get them throughout the day versus, in the lump sum, like in the morning or in the evening?
I would honestly say whatever's kind of just practical for you is going to be the best bet there. There's not necessarily any kind of direct correlation between when you do that activity and how much fat loss you'll see or anything like that. Essentially just what's practical for you to do during your day is going to be best.
Awesome. Thank you.
No problem at all. Appreciate you jumping in and having a chat.
They were great questions. Yeah, cool. Okay, so Felicia, I would love to know, like, is there anything in particular, like, sex, in terms of like sex specific training, that you used to think that you no longer believe?
First of all, like weight training was never something that I associated with women. I always just thought that was a man sport because back in the day, you used to just see men in that area. You never see women. And then slowly, then I started to think it is like a universal thing. But then I thought it was only certain exercises that women should be doing versus men. So I thought chest was not something we should be doing because, like, why would we want to work out chest? And then I thought, like some back exercises, why do we need to get wider? Why do we need to work certain muscles? And then biceps as well, like it just was never a thing that you'd see women doing biceps in the gym. It was always like a man thing. But then I realized like all muscles need to be worked out, and it's like not something that we are like should be structured in genders. It should never be like this is for man and this is for women. I think all muscles are necessary to be worked, and they all help, especially in our composition and how we look. So yeah, that's definitely something that I've changed in the last maybe 5 years.
Yeah, awesome. I think like that would be like the major thing that I would slightly do differently. I generally speaking, as a general heuristic, I would have like a little bit more like glute and hamstring volume for females and a little bit more like quad volume for males. That's generally like, unless a client says otherwise, it's a pretty standard recommendation. Tanya, another thing that pops up is this idea that like lifting weights will make you bulky, and I know we've chatted at length about this at this stage.
Yeah, that is a very strongly rooted myth. I actually wish that was the case because Sam knows I did want to get massive for my photo shoots. I mean, all jokes aside, it is actually like it's taking years of intentional muscle gain and heavy lifting, high calories eating, and, you know, all of that being on a consistent basis to even be close to anywhere looking bulky, especially for women. Because obviously, Dirman can go into more details about, you know, scientific point, but hormones wise, we don't have as much testosterone as men. So getting bulky is not something that it's going to just happen when we go to the gym. But what we are actually looking at when obviously women, we are lifting weights is just feeling tight, sculpted, athletic look that we want. But it will not happen just because you go to the gym a couple of times or even for a couple of years. In fact, I saw a video, and when I say that, it means I saw it on TikTok. But there was one of the bodybuilders who said that she wants this myth to die because actually she found it offensive when some women say, oh, I'm going to get bulky if I go to the gym, because she said, do you know how long it took me to even look anything near that I'm looking now bulky? So I want this to die. Like I want this to die because it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I think like the big kind of overarching take home point there was like if you are to build a lot of muscle mass, and let's say for hypothetically you train for the next like, let's say you train for the next like 5 or 6 years and your scale weight stays the same. If your scale weight stays the same, essentially what that's meaning is you're losing body fat and building muscle mass. And because of the density and the circumference of muscle mass, you will actually be smaller with more muscle mass there. And that's where this kind of like toned goal comes from. It's essentially just individuals building muscle.
And losing fat on top of the muscle.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly.
Yeah.
Sam, anything else on the training front that you see pop up frequently?
Something that cropped up for me when Felicia was actually discussing biceps. So I used to be under this impression, and I think it still makes me cringe now. You know, videos where you see people physically getting injured in the gym, things like that, where someone's on a leg press and unfortunately their legs crumple or something like that, or someone's doing biceps and something not the nicest to see happens. I literally used to get shown these videos all throughout uni, and I don't know why. It made me cringe every single time. But I think that kind of video used to make me think, okay, some exercises here are just kind of innately dangerous, because it was always kind of the same ones that were cropping up all the time. But I don't think that's the case at all. essentially. So let's use a slightly more specific example. If we lock out our legs on a leg press, for example, is that innately dangerous? My answer to that would very, very simply be no. But there's context dependent on that, in the sense that if you've trained kind of 3 years or even longer, and you've never locked out your legs on a leg press, and you can actually move quite a lot of load, I probably wouldn't start locking out your legs on a leg press, because your tolerance to that position isn't going to be the highest in the world, right? But if from the very start you've actually always done it and you're very, very comfortable there, you're actually building up strength and tendon tolerance in that position, it's not going to be an issue at all. There's a reason joints can lock out, right? There's nothing kind of innately bad about it. I think injury risk is more going to be affected by poor technique and poor load selection, where ego lifting essentially starts to come into things, rather than just a specific exercise or joint movement.
I think, like, as a whole, depending on the other sport that we take, resistance training is actually one of the lowest risk. It's the lowest risk forms of physical activity that we can do.
It's a like super controlled environment for the most part.
Yeah, like there's no degree of additional randomness added in. You don't get me wrong, like you can run into degrees of like tendinopathy and things like that. Like there is that degree of like like overuse in injuries that do pop up from time to time, but there will never be like, or not never, the likelihood of having like a big injury is very, very low in the gym environment in comparison to like playing soccer or Gaelic or whatever it is.
Yeah. I mentioned actually kind of poor load selection now. I don't mean that to mean don't go heavy either. I think going heavy is actually, as long as that's well selected heavy load for you, and that's been progressively built up to, is actually probably more beneficial to reduce injury risk than actually create it, because that's where you actually kind of create tendon stiffness and things like that as well.
Okay. So I think if we think a little bit more about like nutrition ones, Sam, anything on the nutrition front that kind of comes to mind to you?
Nutritionally, typically, one of the bigger ones, I suppose, which you can go ahead and kind of dive into, is the idea of protein, or too much protein, being damaging toward your kidneys. That's one of the bigger ones that I typically see.
Yeah. Okay. So, generally speaking, like what we need to factor in is like the protein package. So it's not the case that we have a real limit of like amino acid toxicity. So essentially protein is just a string of amino acids, and there is no like upper limit for like a toxic amount of leucine or tryptophan or whatever it is. I'm sure there a limit does exist there, but generally like how we consume protein, we see like even up towards like 2 grams per pound of body fat doesn't actually increase kidney disease. One of the things that we generally do see is we will see it like increased cardiovascular disease risk, but it's tracking the type of protein and what else is in that food package. So for example, if you're eating like lots of like fatty meats, for example, like you're eating lots of high fat red meats, what we'll generally see is what comes along with the protein is also the additional saturated fat. But if you were to get like, let's say 50% or 60% of your protein was coming through animal products, but then you had 40% of your protein coming in through plant products, then you can have your protein up as high as you essentially want it. Generally speaking, there's no additional benefit from a muscle hypertrophy perspective getting it above like 1.1 grams per pound of body weight. You're not going to see any additional gains. Same from like an appetite regulation perspective as well. As you get it up towards that 1 gram per pound of body weight, you're not going to see any additional benefit for appetite regulation. So there's absolutely no reason to go up that high, essentially.
And you mentioned there, one of the bigger reasons around that is actually kind of the protein package, what comes along with it, right? So when you've got more vegetarian proteins, or plant-based proteins, likelihood is you're getting a little bit more kind of fiber, healthier fats, things like that coming along with it. Do you want to touch on why we may not necessarily want to consume high amounts of saturated fats as well?
Yeah, so the predominant reason, there's two major reasons. One is liver fat accumulation. So for whatever reason, we've seen multiple times now that saturated fat increases liver fat accumulation. Whether this is done in a surplus of calories, whether this is done at maintenance of calories, we see that saturated fat tends to lead to liver fat accumulation. The reason why we care about that most is the spillover from fat in the liver into fat in the pancreas, and the whole host of like downstream effects in terms of blood glucose regulation. So like one of the things that we tend to see is if we get high amounts of liver fat, like the liver becomes insulin resistant. That's when we start to see blood glucose increasing, and then as that progresses, we see that spill over into the pancreas and down regulation in insulin production. And then the next thing is in relation to LDL cholesterol and cardiovascular disease. So essentially, what happens is particular types of saturated fats, so particularly things like butter and high fat red meats, they increase our LDL cholesterol, and as a function of doing that, they increase our cardiovascular disease risk.
Okay, I'm going to actually ask you to carry on as well, because what you've just discussed around insulin actually crops up probably one of the bigger myths that I see, even beyond protein and kidney health and things like that. What about people claiming that insulin is the reason that they can't lose body fat?
Yeah. So essentially what we have is like just mechanistic meandering about a potential like pathway that's going on, and then how that equates in real life, it just doesn't. So essentially we have something called, it's not like, this is not evidence-based whatsoever, but we have this hypothesis called the carbohydrate insulin model, where essentially you consume carbohydrates, that increases your insulin. As a function of your insulin being increased, you have a blunting in lipolysis. That's the breakdown, the oxidization of fat and the usage of it for fuel. And whilst that is true, that high amounts of insulin will block fat oxidation, it doesn't stop fat loss, because you're not going to have that persistent level of high insulin, essentially. Like during them fasting windows, during sleeping, that's when you're going to then turn to using your fat to burn it as fuel. And then that's why it's just straight up superseded by the amount of calories you're consuming.
I'm going to put it back myself.
I know.
You're fully aware. So Tanya, I'll actually come to you. Anything else that crops up for you on the nutritional side that you see a little bit more frequently as well?
I wouldn't say frequently right now. I feel like a lot of the myths are being a little bit more understood. But one myth that I personally grew up with, thanks to my mom. So she used to say, this specific food is fattening, right? She even asks this nowadays. So basically, that's the myth, that certain foods are fattening. But the truth is that no single food inherently makes you gain fat, not even bread, pasta, pizza. But that doesn't mean we can overeat it. So basically, at the end of the day, what matters is obviously the whole amount of calories that we are eating at the end of the day. And then obviously zooming out and looking over the course of the week and months. So that is basically one myth that I actually believed, I don't know, until my late teens. I'm not 21, by the way, guys, if you think that I am. But it was a while that I believed, okay, I shouldn't have pizza because pizza is fattening. Whereas if you manage it healthily in your calories, it's not necessarily going to be fattening that one piece. I
think bread is the one that my parents, my grandparents, or still say now, to be honest. Like, I can't have a loaf of Warburtons in the house.
Yeah, carbs in general, right? Pasta. Yeah. That's a big one as well. So that leads me to the next one. Carbs are, not good. They have to be cut out, when actually the truth is you need them for, especially when you're training, you need them for energy. Your body needs carbs to kind of function. It's just about, are we having enough or are we having too much? That's what basically is important.
I think we need carbs to stay sane and have a bit of joy in food as well.
I mean, we saw that in my fat loss journey. When I got that crumpet, if carbs were increased, I was so happy.
I think a lot of it stems from like the pushback to that. It stems from the fact that carbohydrates aren't technically essential. Like we like amino acids and protein are essential. We have certain essential fatty acids. Carbohydrates as a food group actually aren't essential. We can turn and use like ketones for fuel and things like that. But like that statement, while it is true, has no input on the health value of carbohydrates or how they affect body fat.
We've actually had a question come in the chat as well around carbohydrates. So, can you lose weight and fat and build muscle if you go over your carbs most days of the week, despite staying within calorie goals? Yes, absolutely. We've got a good amount of research on kind of the exact split between fats and carbs when we're in a deficit. Doesn't seem to have any sort of an outcome when it comes to the degrees of body fat that we actually see come off. So if you're over your carbs and under your fats by an equivalent amount of calories, so your net caloric deficit stays exactly the same, you'll see the exact same results. To be honest, that's something I personally like to do myself. If I'm in fat loss, I feel like I can get a little bit more volume out of carbohydrates. So it just keeps me a little bit more satiated. And if that's something that just practically works for you a little bit better, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. It's like protein and calories is the kind of hierarchy there when it comes to body composition change.
Yeah. Something to potentially note though, with just food labels in the US as well. Sometimes the calorie amount on those labels can actually be a little bit off. So it is worth, especially if we're using a lot of, say, carb-friendly or net carb marketed food produce, it is potentially worth placing a little bit more emphasis on aligning the macros a touch closer there. Because like I say, sometimes on the food labels, the calories can actually sit a little bit lower.
Tanya, another common one that pops up is eating after 6 o'clock.
Yeah. Again, it's all about the calories at the end of the day, or ultimately at the end of the week when you zoom out. Yeah, that's basically it.
Yeah.
It means for some people, it works better for them to, after a long day of work, they eat the dinner together at 7 p.m. So it's kind of unreasonable to expect not to eat after a certain time. And, for some people, it works to eat in a certain window. So I have a couple of clients that are doing intermittent fasting, that works for them. That's the reason why they're doing it. But I mean, your body, food, calories don't know what time it is. They don't travel to different parts of the body because it's a different time. So at the end of the day, it's all about the calories in, calories out.
Yeah. Like, as you said there, like we actually have two effective interventions that contradict each other. So like intermittent fasting is effective. Like generally speaking, we'll do that in the morning. We'll just kind of skip breakfast or push breakfast back. There does seem to be a grain of truth to this idea of like eating after 6 o'clock will make you fat, and it's nothing got to do with how your body metabolizes food. But we generally, like, there's been over the last 3 years anyway, there has been a little bit of research looking at like essentially the meal timings and when you consume the predominance of your calories and how it affects overall calorie consumption and appetite regulation. So it does seem to be the case that if you can have let's say if you can have 60-70% of your calories by 3 o'clock, that it actually does seem to be helpful for appetite regulation. But socially, that just doesn't work, because generally speaking, we actually do the opposite. You generally have your bigger meal towards the later end of the day at dinner. So there is a grain of truth to it, but practically, I generally lean towards more of that kind of intermittent fasting approach, where you'd have you fast up till 10 o'clock or 10 and 11 o'clock, as long as you can push that back, and then do leave a couple more calories for the evening. It's just personally, I find it easier to adhere to.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's also very individual. Yeah. Some people prefer to go to bed feeling a little bit fuller. Some people prefer going not full or not eating at all, later. I think it's very individual, but what's going to matter at the end of the day, if your goal is fat loss, is obviously calories.
Yeah. Tanya, I actually want to continue asking you, in terms of actually timing things, what about when it comes to caffeine as well? A lot of people, myself included, will wake up and go ahead and have some caffeine first thing in the morning. There are a few myths around, okay, maybe you should wait sort of 60 minutes, 90 minutes before you have your first cup of coffee or your first energy drink or whatever that caffeine source looks like for you. What are your thoughts on that?
I can't relate. I don't drink caffeine
Oh yeah.
at all. Well, yeah, it's very trendy on social media, I noticed lately. And again, I'm gonna let Dee go into details of scientific of that. But personally, I did notice that it's all about the moderation of it. If it works for you first thing in the morning, it's fine. It's not going to inherently, affect your health. But obviously where you do want to be careful is if by 10 a.m. you do have way, way, way too much, but it's not the truth, basically.
Yeah, so it's this idea that was largely made popular by Andrew Huberman, who has a couple of dodgy positions. It's just not evidence-based. There's this kind of, again, more mechanistic speculation around like circadian rhythm alignment and things like that. It just doesn't seem to matter.
I mean, we do wake up because your cortisol increases anyway, right? At that time. So
yeah. There's a completely natural elevation of cortisol in the morning, which actually just helps us wake up. So that's not necessarily innately a negative thing at all.
Exactly. I'm just supporting my body.
just doubling down.
I'm just like, yeah. I'm like, okay, girl, I'm ready to go. Let's go.
Okay, guys. Right, we're gonna bring today's call to a close. If you do have any additional like myths or stuff that you've seen on social media, do drop them in the chat. But like personally, this is one of my favorite things to do. I love this stuff.
It's myth busting.
Yeah.
Honestly, one of them that we didn't know that we didn't mention that it's popular, spot reduction. Like losing fat from a specific part of the body. And what I experienced with clients is usually midsection. And that is also a myth. As you are losing fat, unfortunately, your body will be losing fat throughout your whole body. Some people will lose it from up down. And some people will hold it around in a midsection. That's why it takes a little bit longer to get to the point where you're happy with that fat loss. But there is no such thing, unfortunately, as spot reduction.
Yeah, it would be nice if it was.
It would be nice.
But yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. It is just kind of purely genetic factors which are going to dictate where we kind of gain predominant amounts of body fat and where we actually lose it from as well. I think a good thing to actually close on, Dee, a lot of these things, of course, are predominantly kind of peddled through social media and things like that. What would be kind of like a framework, I suppose, that you could give to people for how to go about spotting a bit of misinformation online, or when something that's being kind of peddled is potentially a myth?
Yeah. So I think this is really like a nihilistic position to have, but if something is exciting, it's probably not evidence-based. If something is new, it's like we probably don't have the literature there to support it as of yet. Like these things take time to like really pan out. Like let's say, for example, my major overarching positions on like diet, like setting up a healthy diet, none of them things have changed to any major degree in the last like 7-8 years. And it's going to take like the equivalent amount of time for me to maybe change a position on things, because one, like we've actually have a lot of like well done nutrition science to be able to know how to set up a healthy diet. For example, don't get me wrong, there's niche things, like there's niche cool like supplements and things like that coming out, but like this idea that we're going to see that we've like that the dietary guidelines have been a myth and it's all wrong, and actually we should be following this ketogenic or carnivore diet, like the likelihood of that being true is like very, very low. I don't even know how to describe how low the likelihood is. But yeah, I think one of the big things like is looking at the way that people communicate things as well. Like if you see how I sit and speak about things, there's always that degree of like uncertainty baked into it. I'll lean towards a particular direction, and my confidence in the position will be based on how well established the research is. So I think just like trying to build that kind of framework of like a bullshit detector based on how exciting the claim is, how in line the claim is with like the current dietary guidelines. Like if the position that an individual is holding is opposing dietary guidelines, more than likely it's not correct. And if you can use the dietary recommendations, like if you think about them, it's like fruit, veg, lean sources of protein, limit your ultra processed food, limit your sodium, try get like 200 minutes of physical activity a day, try be nice and physically active, like all of these things, like the likelihood of any of these bits changing is really, really low. And I know it can be exciting for new novel things to come out, but like the likelihood of them being true is quite low, to be fair.
Yeah, I think if something seems like a shortcut as well, it's probably not going to be too evidence-based, because everything that you've just kind of outlined there isn't necessarily exciting because it takes time, right? It takes a degree of effort. It takes a degree of kind of longevity adhering to these things. And ultimately kind of the like long route to it, I suppose, is your shortcut, because it's generally speaking the only one that ever kind of pans out.
Yeah, and there's always a degree of storytelling to their information as well. So they'll speak about like, well, my patient or my client or what I've done myself that fixed X, Y, and Z. There's always that, yeah, like there's no, okay, like here's this meta-analysis looking at the latest 5 or 6 randomized controls on this. It's always like speculation about mechanisms and describing pathways and things like that. And it can give this veneer of science without actually being scientific as a whole.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's going to be us going ahead and wrapping it up. Hopefully we covered a few things that were useful to you, and as always, thank you everyone who came through. Have an amazing weekend.